auto-da-fe. The crowd has been waiting for hours. When the procession finally begins, silence drops over the plaza. Men and women shuffle forward in yellow robes marked with flames and crosses. Barefoot, heads bowed. Some whisper prayers. Others stare straight ahead. The priests lead them to a raised platform. The charges are read aloud. Heresy. Blasphemy. Refusing to recant. Then the sentence. The crowd erupts. This is the auto-da-fe, a public ceremony where guilt is announced and penance extracted. The name means act of faith, but the faith it demanded wasn't private. It was performed. Stage. Witnessed by thousands. The real power wasn't in the punishment. It was in the display. The convicted wore Sanbenitos, humiliating garments that announced their crimes. They stood before the community stripped of dignity, reduced to symbols. And the crowd mattered just as much as the condemned. By watching, by reacting, they reinforced the boundary. They declared together, this is what happens when you step outside what we allow. Shame works differently when it's public. Private guilt can be rationalized, hidden, endured. Public humiliation rewires how you see yourself, because it changes how everyone else sees you. Your identity shifts. You're no longer just someone who made a mistake. You're the one who was punished. That mark doesn't fade. The pattern shows up everywhere. A politician caught in scandal doesn't just face consequences. They face ritualized disgrace, apology tours, public statements, crowds demanding accountability. A celebrity exposed doesn't just lose followers. They're subjected to collective judgment that replays for days. The auto-da-fe perfected this mechanism. It turned punishment into theater. The procession, the garments, the public reading. Every element maximized visibility and shame. And shame thrives on witnesses. The more people see your disgrace, the deeper it cuts. What made it especially effective was participation. The crowd wasn't passive. They jeered. They prayed. They affirmed the verdicts. Their presence transformed individual punishment into collective agreement. And that agreement, performed publicly, made dissent nearly impossible. Pillory. Being unable to move while people throw things at your face. That's what the pillory did. It locked your head and hands in place, bent you forward, left you exposed. You couldn't shield yourself, couldn't turn away. You could only stand there while the crowd decided how much punishment you deserved. The device wasn't designed for serious physical harm, though harm often happened. The purpose was humiliation. By trapping someone in a fixed position in the town center, it transformed them into a spectacle. Everyone who passed could see. Mock. Throw rotten food, mud, stones. The punishment wasn't the device. It was the crowd. And the crowd always showed up. Market days were ideal because more people gathered. The convicted stood locked for hours, sometimes days. Theft, fraud, lying. Crimes that violated community trust but didn't warrant hanging. The pillory reminded people publicly that behavior had consequences. And the community participated in delivering them. This participation transformed everything. The authorities set the sentence. The crowd controlled the intensity. A well-liked person might face mockery but little violence. Someone despised could be pelted hard enough to cause injury, even death. The pillory let the community express judgment. And that judgment wasn't always proportional. The psychological damage outlasted the physical pain. Being locked in the pillory marked you. Even after release, people remembered. Not just what you'd done. They remembered seeing you trapped, powerless, covered in filth. That image stuck. It redefined you. The same dynamic plays out today. A viral video exposes someone's worst moment. Thousands pile on. Comments, shares, memes. The person becomes a symbol, stripped of context, reduced to that act. The wrongdoing might be real, but the response often exceeds it. The crowd controls the intensity. The pillory worked through weaponized visibility. It forced the convicted into a position where they couldn't hide, couldn't fight back, couldn't protect their own face. And it invited everyone else to participate in degradation. What amplified the shame was physical helplessness. You weren't just being judged. You were being judged while unable to defend yourself. That powerlessness sent a message a step out of line, and this could be you. Trapped, exposed, at the mercy of people who don't have to show any. Scold's Bridle. What do you do with someone who talks too much? Someone who questions authority, spreads gossip, refuses to stay quiet. You silence them. Publicly. Painfully. With a device designed to turn speech itself into punishment. The Scold's Bridle was a metal cage fitted over the head. Inside, a flat iron plate pressed down on the tongue. Some versions had spikes. Moving your mouth caused pain. Speaking became impossible. And you wore it in public, paraded through town so everyone could see what happened to women who didn't know their place. The device was almost exclusively used on women. The crime wasn't violence or theft. It was talking. Arguing with husbands. Criticizing neighbors. Challenging men in positions of power. The punishment didn't fit some legal standard. It fit a social one that women should be quiet, obedient, invisible. What made the Scold's Bridle effective wasn't just the physical pain. It was the message. By forcing silence on someone publicly, it declared that their voice had no value. That speaking out was a crime worth punishing. That the community agreed they needed to be muted. You see the same pattern in modern silencing tactics. Someone speaks up about abuse or misconduct. They're told they're overreacting, too emotional, making a scene. The message is the same. Your voice is the problem. And when enough people repeat that message, the person starts to believe it. They stop speaking. Not because they were physically silenced, but because they learned that speaking carries consequences. The Scold's Bridle is gone, but the architecture of silencing remains. Public humiliation still functions as a warning. Speak out, and you'll be punished. Not just by authorities, but by everyone watching. The crowd becomes the enforcement mechanism, just like it did centuries ago. Charivari. The noise starts after dark. Pots banging. Voices shouting. A crowd gathers outside a house, making as much racket as possible. They're not there to celebrate. They're there to punish. To shame. To let the entire neighborhood know that someone inside has violated the rules. This was Charivari, a form of public mockery where the community acted as judge and executioner. The targets varied. A man who married a much younger woman. A widow who remarried too quickly. Someone who beat their spouse or cheated in business. The crowd decided who deserved humiliation, and they delivered it loud enough that no one could ignore it. The ritual could last for days. The crowd would return night after night, banging pots, chanting insults, sometimes performing mock ceremonies that mimicked the offense. A man who remarried would be paraded on a donkey backwards. A couple with a large age gap would be serenaded with obscene songs. The goal was to make the shame so unbearable that the person either left town or conformed. What made Charivari powerful was its collective nature. This wasn't one person attacking another. It was the entire community declaring that a line had been crossed. And because everyone participated, resisting felt impossible. You weren't just disagreeing with one neighbor. You were defying the entire social order. The mechanism still exists. Online pile-ons function the same way. Someone does something the crowd deems unacceptable. Thousands of people show up to express their disapproval. Not quietly, loudly, publicly. The platforms change, but the ritual remains collective noise designed to force conformity. Charivari worked because it weaponized community. It turned neighbors into enforcers. And it sent a clear message: step outside what we allow, and we'll make sure everyone knows. Cucking Stool. They strapped you into a chair. Then they dunked you in the river. Again and again, until the crowd decided you'd had enough. You came up gasping, humiliated, soaked, everyone watching, everyone laughing. And the message was clear: this is what happens when you don't behave. The cucking stool, also called the ducking stool, was used primarily on women accused of being scolds, gossips, or troublemakers. The punishment wasn't about the cold water. It was about the spectacle. Being strapped into a chair and publicly dunked turned you into entertainment. Your suffering became the town's amusement. The process was designed for maximum visibility. The stool was set up in a public space, often near a river or pond. A crowd would gather. The accused was strapped in, and the contraption lowered her into the water. Sometimes once. Sometimes repeatedly. The crowd controlled how long it lasted. They could demand more dunkings, more humiliation, more proof that the punishment had been delivered. What made it especially degrading was the loss of control. You couldn't fight back, couldn't escape, couldn't even shield yourself from the laughter. You were completely at the mercy of the crowd, and they rarely showed any. The same dynamic shows up in modern public shamings. Someone makes a mistake, and it's captured on video. The footage spreads. Thousands of people watch, comment, mock. The person can't respond, can't defend themselves. They're stuck in that moment, replayed endlessly, their humiliation turned into content. The cucking stool worked because it stripped away dignity in the most public way possible. It forced submission, and it reminded everyone watching that defiance came with consequences they couldn't control. Breaking wheel. Some punishments aren't designed for correction. They're designed to destroy, to make an example so brutal that everyone who witnesses it never forgets. The breaking wheel was one of those punishments. The convicted was tied to a large wheel. Their limbs were broken with an iron bar, one by one, methodically. Then the wheel was raised on a pole and left in a public square. The person still alive would hang there for hours, sometimes days, while the town went about its business. Children played nearby. Markets opened. Life continued. And the broken body remained on display. This wasn't just execution. It was spectacle designed to embed fear. The pain was extreme, but the suffering was prolonged. Death came slowly, and the entire process happened where everyone could see. What made the breaking wheel so effective as a tool of control was its visibility. The authorities didn't just punish the individual. They created a visual reminder that stayed in the public square long after the person died. It sent a message to everyone who passed. This is what happens when you cross the line. And the line is wherever we say it is. The same mechanism operates in modern displays of power. When authorities want to send a message, they don't do it quietly. They make it visible. Public arrests, perp walks, trial spectacles. The goal isn't just punishment, it's demonstration. The more people who see, the more effective the message becomes. The breaking wheel is gone, but the logic remains. Public punishment still functions as both penalty and warning. It targets the individual, but it speaks to the crowd, and the crowd, watching in silence, absorbs the lesson. Drawing and quartering. The punishment wasn't designed to be quick. It was designed to be remembered. The convicted was dragged through the streets tied to a horse, then hanged, but not to death, cut down while still conscious, disemboweled, dismembered, the body divided into quarters, each piece displayed in a different part of the city. This was drawing and quartering, reserved for high treason. The crime was political. The punishment was theater. And the message was absolute. It challenged the crown. And this is what happens. What made it so effective wasn't just the brutality. It was the prolonged visibility. The execution happened in public. Crowds gathered. They watched every stage. And afterward, the body parts remained on display for weeks, sometimes months. Heads mounted on spikes. Limbs hung at city gates. Constant reminders of what defiance cost. The mechanism worked through sustained fear. A single execution could control behavior for years. People didn't need to witness it directly. They just needed to see the aftermath. A decaying limb hanging above the marketplace. A skull watching over the town square. The threat became permanent. You see the same logic in modern power displays. When authorities want to send a lasting message, they don't do it once. They make it stick. Mugshots circulated endlessly. Court footage replayed. Public records that never disappear. The punishment extends beyond the sentence because the visibility never ends. Drawing and quartering worked because it transformed a body into a message. And that message stayed visible long after the person was gone. Gibbeting. The body hangs in a cage, high enough that everyone passing underneath can see it. It's been there for days, maybe weeks. The flesh has started to decay. Birds have been at it. But it stays. A fixture in the landscape. A warning that doesn't fade. Gibbeting took execution one step further. The person was killed, then placed in an iron cage and suspended in a public location. Roads, crossroads, harbors. Anywhere with heavy traffic. The cage kept the body from being removed or buried. It stayed there, rotting in full view until nothing remained. The purpose wasn't just punishment. It was deterrence through permanent display. The gibbet became part of the environment. Travelers passed it daily. Children grew up seeing it. The community normalized the presence of a decaying corpse because removing it would have been worse. It would have meant defying the authority that put it there. What made gibbeting especially powerful was its duration. A public execution lasts hours. A gibbeted body lasts months. The horror fades, but the presence doesn't. It becomes background, and that's the point. The threat isn't loud, it's constant. The same principle operates in digital permanence. A mistake captured online doesn't disappear. It stays accessible. Searchable. A take to your name indefinitely. The initial exposure might be intense, but the lasting damage comes from knowing it's always there. Anyone can find it. Anytime. Gibbeting worked because it turned a corpse into infrastructure. The body stopped being human and became a monument. A permanent reminder that the rules don't negotiate. Ducking. Cold water. Again and again. You're strapped into a chair, lowered into the river, pulled back up gasping. The crowd watches. Someone decides when it's enough. Not you. Never you. Ducking, sometimes called the ducking stool, was used on people accused of being troublemakers. Scolds. Gossipers. Complainers. Mostly women. The punishment was simple. Public humiliation through repeated submersion. You didn't drown. You just suffered. Visibly. For as long as the crowd wanted. The process was designed for entertainment. The stool sat by the water. A crowd gathered. The accused was strapped in, fully clothed, and dunked repeatedly. Each submersion brought laughter. Jeers. Encouragement to dunk her again. The crowd controlled the duration. They could demand more. Always more. What made ducking effective was the complete loss of agency. You couldn't fight back. Couldn't escape. Couldn't even beg effectively because you kept going underwater. You were an object. A thing to be dunked until someone decided you'd learned your lesson. The dynamic mirrors modern pile-ons. Someone says something deemed unacceptable. The response isn't measured. It's relentless. Wave after wave of condemnation. And the person can't respond fast enough. Can't defend themselves adequately. They're drowning in a tension they can't control, and the crowd decides when it stops. Ducking worked because it stripped away every defense. You couldn't talk your way out. Couldn't fight. Couldn't even maintain dignity. You just endured until it ended. Amende Honorable. Imagine being forced to kneel in public, to recite words you don't believe, to apologize for crimes you might not have committed, all while a crowd watches. Records. judges whether your performance is convincing enough. This was Amende Honorable, a ritual of public penance used across Europe. The convicted, often wearing only a shirt, would kneel outside a church or in a public square. They'd hold a candle, confess their sins aloud, beg forgiveness. The specifics varied, but the core remained forced public submission. The punishment wasn't physical, it was psychological. By making someone perform humility, the ritual didn't just punish. It broke. You weren't just saying the words. You were demonstrating that you'd been defeated, that the community had won, that your will no longer mattered. What made it especially degrading was the performance requirement. You couldn't just go through the motions. You had to appear sincere, convincingly remorseful. If the crowd or authorities deemed your performance insufficient, you'd do it again. And again, until they believed you meant it. The pattern repeats in forced apologies today. A public figure makes a mistake. The mob demands an apology. But the apology has to be perfect. Specific enough, emotional enough. If it feels scripted or insufficient, the demands intensify. Do it again. Mean it this time. Prove you've learned. Amende Honorable worked because it forced people to participate in their own humiliation. The words came from their own mouth. The submission was performed by their own body, and everyone watching knew it wasn't voluntary. Rough music. The noise starts just after dark. Pots clanging, drums pounding, voices shouting in unison. It's not random. It's targeted, and it's coming for someone specific. Rough music was a form of communal shaming where neighbors would gather outside someone's home and create deliberate, chaotic noise. The target had violated social norms, remarried too quickly, abused a spouse, cheated in business. The crowd didn't need official authority. They decided the offense deserved punishment, and they delivered it themselves. The ritual could last for nights. The same crowd would return, bringing more people, making more noise. Sometimes they'd march the offender through the streets while maintaining the racket. Sometimes they'd perform mock ceremonies. The goal was to make life unbearable until the person either left or conformed. What made rough music effective was its informality. There were no courts, no official sentences, just collective agreement that someone had crossed a line. And because everyone participated, resistance felt impossible. You weren't fighting one person. You were fighting the entire community. The mechanism still thrives online. Someone does something the crowd deems wrong. Thousands show up to express disapproval. Not quietly, lewdly, relentlessly, tagging them, flooding their mentions, making it impossible to ignore. The platforms are different, but the ritual is identical: collective noise designed to force compliance. Rough music worked because it weaponized the community. Your neighbors became your enforcers, and the message was clear: conform, or we'll make your life impossible. Carting. They put you in a cart, not to transport you, to display you. The cart moves slowly through the busiest streets at the busiest times. Everyone sees, everyone knows what you did, and you can't hide. Carting was used for prostitutes, thieves, and others considered moral offenders. The punishment was simple: parade the guilty through town in an open cart or wagon. Sometimes they were stripped to the waist. Sometimes they wore signs announcing their crime. Always the route was designed for maximum visibility. The process turned the entire town into a witness. The cart moved slowly. It stopped at marketplaces, churches, busy intersections. Crowds gathered. Some threw things. Others just stared. The convicted couldn't escape the attention. They were trapped in the cart, forced to endure hours of public scrutiny. What made carting especially humiliating was the duration. A pillory locked you in one place. Carting moved you, ensuring fresh audiences constantly. You couldn't get used to one crowd. New faces appeared every few minutes, each one judging, each one seeing you at your lowest. The same dynamic plays out in modern exposure. A scandal goes viral. The story spreads from platform to platform. Each new audience brings fresh judgment. The person can't outrun it because it follows them everywhere. Different communities, same condemnation. Carting worked because it eliminated any safe space. You couldn't retreat. Couldn't find a corner to hide in. The punishment followed you through every street, ensuring everyone saw what you'd become. Neck verse. There was a time when reading a single sentence could save your life. Recite one Bible verse, prove you could read and avoid execution. The verse was always the same. Psalm 51:1. Have mercy upon me, O God. If you could say it, you claimed benefit of clergy. The court would hand you to the church instead of the gallows. This was the neck verse, so called because it saved your neck. The logic was medieval. Clergy could read, laypeople mostly couldn't. So literacy became a legal loophole. Anyone who could recite the verse claimed they were clergy, even if they'd never set foot in a church. The system created an absurd inequality. A literate merchant who committed murder could walk free. An illiterate peasant who stole bread faced hanging. The crime didn't matter. What mattered was whether you'd memorized the right words. And people caught on. The verse became so well known that criminalized it phonetically. They couldn't read, but they could repeat the sounds. Courts knew this was happening but couldn't prove it. The loophole stayed open for centuries. What made it especially unjust was the visibility of the gap. Executions were public. Everyone saw who escaped and who didn't. And the difference wasn't virtue or innocence. It was access to education. The system didn't just punish crime, it punished poverty. The same pattern shows up in modern legal systems. Wealth buys better lawyers, lighter sentences, alternative programs. Poverty gets overworked public defenders and harsher penalties. The outcomes diverge not because of the crime, but because of resources. And everyone watching knows the system isn't fair. They just can't do anything about it. The neck verse is gone, but the principle remains. If you know the right words, speak the right language, the system bends. If you don't, it breaks you. Infamy Sanction. What happens when punishment doesn't end with the sentence? When the law marks you permanently, stripping rights you never get back. Infamy was a legal status in Roman and medieval law. Once declared infamous, you lost the right to testify in court, hold public office, or make legal contracts. You'd served your sentence, paid your debt, but the mark remained. Permanent, visible in every legal interaction for the rest of your life. The punishment extended beyond the crime. You couldn't defend yourself in court because your testimony held no weight. Couldn't work in certain professions because the law barred you. Couldn't participate in civic life because infamy stripped those rights. The sentence might have lasted months. The consequences lasted forever. What made infamy especially effective was its legal permanence. This wasn't social stigma. It was codified exclusion. Written into law. Enforced by courts. You couldn't talk your way out of it or wait for people to forget. The system itself treated you as lesser. The same mechanism operates today. A criminal record doesn't just document past actions. It shapes future possibilities. Job applications ask about convictions. Housing applications reject based on records. Voting rights disappear in some jurisdictions. The initial sentence ends, but the legal consequences don't. Infamy worked because it created a permanent underclass. People who'd committed crimes served time, but never fully rejoined society. The law itself ensured they stayed marked. And that mark followed them into every interaction where the law mattered. Penitential Procession. They walk barefoot through the streets, heads uncovered. Sometimes in white robes, sometimes stripped to the waist. A priest leads them. The crowd watches. Everyone knows what they've done. Everyone knows why they're here. This was the Penitential Procession, a public ritual of forced remorse used by the Catholic Church. Sinners would walk a prescribed route, often to a church or shrine, performing visible acts of penance, carrying candles, reciting prayers, demonstrating submission before God and community. The ritual served two purposes. For the sinner, it was supposed to bring spiritual cleansing. For everyone else, it was a demonstration. A public reminder that the Church held authority over bodies and souls. That sin required not just private confession but public performance. What made it degrading was the performance requirement. You weren't just repenting privately. You were displaying repentance, and the community judged whether your performance was sufficient. Too proud, and you'd do it again. Too dramatic, and they'd mock you. The line between acceptable humility and unacceptable pride was narrow, and you had to walk it in public. The pattern repeats in modern apology culture. Make a mistake and the demand isn't just for private reflection. It's for public performance. Post a statement. Appear remorseful. Demonstrate you've learned. And if the performance feels insufficient, do it again. Longer. More emotional. More convincing. Penitential Procession worked because it transformed internal states into public spectacle. Your remorse had to be visible, measurable, performed. And the crowd, watching, decided whether you'd suffered enough. Branding. Hot iron pressed into flesh. The mark burns deep. It scars. And once it's there, it doesn't fade. Anyone who sees your hand, your cheek, your forehead knows what you did. The punishment travels with you. Permanent. Visible. Impossible to hide. Branding marked criminals with letters indicating their crime. T for thief. M for manslaughter. B for blasphemer. The pain lasted minutes. The mark lasted forever. And unlike other punishments that ended, branding followed you into every interaction. The purpose wasn't just punishment, it was identification. A branded person couldn't move to a new town and start over. Couldn't hide their past. The mark announced it before they said a word. Employers saw it. Neighbors saw it. Anyone close enough to notice knew they were dealing with a criminal. What made branding especially cruel was its permanence. You couldn't serve your time and move on. The punishment reset with every new person you met. Every job you applied for. Every relationship you tried to build. The crime might have been years ago. The mark made it present tense. The same logic drives modern background checks and digital records. Your past doesn't stay past. It's searchable, permanent, a take to your name indefinitely. And while the marks aren't physical, they function the same way. An employer Googles your name. The old arrest shows up. The mistake you made a decade ago becomes the reason you don't get hired now. Branding worked because it made punishment portable. The mark went wherever you went. And everyone who saw it treated you accordingly. Exemplary punishment. Some punishments aren't calibrated to the crime. They're calibrated to the audience. The goal isn't justice for the individual. It's deterrence for everyone else. Exemplary punishment takes someone and makes their suffering disproportionately severe. Not because their crime was worse, but because the authorities want to send a message. One shoplifter gets a fine. Another, chosen almost randomly, gets years in prison. The difference isn't what they did. It's what the system wants others to see. The mechanism works through fear multiplication. If punishment seems random, everyone feels vulnerable. You can't predict who'll be chosen for the harsh example, so you comply to avoid the risk. The actual fairness doesn't matter. What matters is the threat feels real. What makes exemplary punishment effective is its visibility. The example has to be seen, publicized, made into a story that spreads. Otherwise, it's just one harsh sentence among many. But when it's amplified, when everyone hears about it, the deterrent effect scales. One person suffers. Thousands adjust their behavior. You see this in zero-tolerance policies. A student brings nail clippers to school and gets expelled. The punishment wildly exceeds the offense. But that's the point. The administrators want other students to see what happens, to internalize that even minor violations carry severe consequences. The individual case becomes a lesson for the group. Exemplary punishment works because it weaponizes inequality. Not everyone gets punished the same way for the same act. And that unpredictability creates a climate where everyone polices themselves, afraid they might be next. Shaming ritual. Every culture has them. Ceremonies designed to humiliate, to mark someone's failure publicly, to make them perform their own degradation while the community watches. Shaming rituals take many forms. Medieval Europe had the Charivari. Indigenous communities had specific ceremonies for rule breakers. Modern institutions have their own versions. But the structure is always similar. The offender is placed in a defined role, the community gathers, and the humiliation follows a script. What makes these rituals powerful is their cultural weight. This isn't random mockery. It's formalized, expected, part of how the society maintains order. And because it's ritualized, it feels legitimate. Not like bullying, like justice. The ritual also creates participation. The community doesn't just witness. They perform specific roles. They chant, throw things, circle the offender. Their active involvement transforms individual punishment into collective affirmation. We all agree this person violated our norms. We all participate in correcting them. Modern versions are everywhere. Struggling students forced to stand in front of the class. Employees called out in team meetings. Public figures subjected to ritualized apology performances. The specifics change, but the structure remains. Isolate the individual, gather the group, perform the shaming. Shaming rituals work because they're predictable. Everyone knows how they go. The offender knows what's coming. The community knows their role, and that predictability makes them sustainable. They don't require innovation, just repetition. The ritual reinforces itself every time it runs. Penance Garment. Some punishments you wear. A specific garment that announces your crime before you speak. Everyone who sees it knows. You're marked not by your body but by your clothing, and you can't take it off. Penance garments were used across medieval Europe. Different designs for different offenses. Prostitutes wore yellow. Heretics wore robes painted with flames. Adulterers might wear nothing but a white sheet. The garment transformed you into a walking advertisement of your sin. The punishment was visual and continuous. Unlike a flogging that ended or a fine that was paid, the garment stayed. You wore it for weeks, sometimes months, to market, to church, everywhere. And everyone who passed you understood what it meant. What made it especially degrading was the forced participation. You had to put it on yourself. Walk outside wearing it. Continue your daily life while visibly marked. The punishment wasn't passive. You performed it with every step. The same mechanism operates in modern shame markers. Sex offender registries that force people to announce their status to neighbors. Ankle monitors visible under clothing. Court-ordered signs in yards. The method changes, but the logic remains. Make the punishment visible so the community can enforce it through scrutiny. Penance garments worked because they turned the body into a billboard. Your crime became your most visible feature, and you couldn't escape it without breaking the law again. Stocks. Wooden boards lock around your ankles. Sometimes your wrists too. You're seated or standing, trapped in place at the town center. Hours pass. Your legs cramp, your back aches, and the crowd keeps gathering. The stocks were simpler than the pillory, but just as effective. They immobilized you in a public space, turning you into a fixture. A thing people walked past, pointed at, mocked. The punishment was physical discomfort paired with social exposure. What made the stocks distinct was the lower position. The pillory bent you forward at head height. The stocks sat you lower, often on the ground. More vulnerable. Easier to ignore or abuse. People could spit on you without effort. Children could throw things from a safe distance. The position amplified the powerlessness. The duration varied. Minor offenses meant a few hours. Repeat offenders might sit for days. And during that time, you couldn't defend yourself, couldn't move away, couldn't even shift position enough to relieve the cramping. You just endured. The dynamic mirrors modern public restraint. Videos of people in handcuffs, detained but not yet charged, circulated online. The restraint itself becomes the spectacle. Guilty or not, the image of powerlessness sticks. The audience sees someone unable to defend themselves and draws conclusions. The stocks work by making helplessness visible. You weren't just being punished. You were being displayed in a state of total vulnerability. And everyone who saw you registered that you'd been rendered powerless. Humiliation Spectacle. Why do crowds gather to watch someone suffer? Not just witness, enjoy, laugh. Treat degradation as entertainment. Humiliation spectacles turned punishment into performance. Public floggings drew crowds like theater. Executions became social events. The suffering wasn't incidental. It was the attraction. People came specifically to see someone brought low, and the more dramatic the humiliation, the bigger the audience. The spectacle served multiple purposes. For authorities, it demonstrated power. For the crowd, it provided entertainment and reinforcement of social boundaries. And for the person being humiliated, it transformed their punishment into a public memory that would outlast the event itself. What made these spectacles especially cruel was the performative aspect. The person being punished wasn't just enduring pain. They were performing it. Their reactions, crying, begging, maintaining dignity, became part of the show, and the crowd judged the performance. Modern versions are everywhere. Reality TV that humiliates contestants. Viral videos of people losing control. Public meltdowns recorded and shared. The technology changed. The appetite didn't. Audiences still gather to watch people suffer, and the humiliation still serves as both entertainment and social lesson. Humiliation spectacles work because they satisfy multiple desires simultaneously. The voyeuristic pleasure of watching someone suffer. The moral satisfaction of seeing rules enforced. The social bonding that comes from shared judgment. All packaged as public good. Sanbenito. Yellow cloth covered in flames and demons. You wear it during your trial, after your sentencing, sometimes for years. It marks you as a heretic, someone whose beliefs endangered their soul and the community's. The Sanbenito was the Spanish Inquisition's signature shaming garment. Different designs indicated different levels of guilt. Flames pointing up meant you were condemned. Flames pointing down meant you'd repented. Crosses indicated lesser offenses. But all of them announced this person investigated, judged, and found wanting. What made the Sanbenito particularly effective was its religious weight. This wasn't just legal punishment. It was spiritual condemnation. Wearing it meant you'd been declared a threat to salvation itself. And in a society where religion structured everything, that mark carried immense power. The garment stayed visible even after the initial punishment ended. Some were hung in churches with the person's name attaked. Others remained in family homes as permanent reminders. The humiliation extended across generations. Your descendants lived with the knowledge that their ancestor wore the Sanbenito. The same pattern shows up in ideological marking. People fired for political views find their names permanently attaked to those controversies. One statement, one affiliation, becomes their defining characteristic. The original context fades. The mark remains. Sanbenitos worked because they transformed belief into visible crime. Your thoughts, your doubts, your questions, all made public through clothing designed to announce your spiritual failure. Judicial Ordeal. Hold this hot iron. Walk across burning coals. Submerge your hand in boiling water. If you're innocent, God will protect you. If you're guilty, your burns will prove it. Judicial ordeals used physical trials to determine guilt. The logic was diviner God wouldn't let the innocent suffer. So if your hand blistered after holding hot metal, you were guilty. If the burns healed quickly, you were innocent. The trial outsourced judgment to supernatural intervention. The system was rigged from the start. Burns always happened. Infection was common, but the interpretation had room for manipulation. Priests could declare faster or slower healing. The accused's social status influenced the reading. The ordeal appeared objective while remaining completely subjective. What made it especially insidious was the false legitimacy. Because it invoked divine judgment, questioning the results meant questioning God. The accused couldn't appeal. The community accepted the outcome as truth. And if you died or were permanently injured during the ordeal, that just confirmed your guilt. Modern versions use different mechanisms, but similar logic. Lie detector tests that aren't scientifically reliable but carry legal weight. Interrogation techniques designed to produce confessions regardless of guilt. Systems that claim objectivity while building in bias. Judicial ordeals worked because they dressed prejudice as divine will. The outcome was predetermined. The trial just provided cover. Mortification Display. A kneeling on stone until your knees bleed. Wearing hair shirts that abrade your skin. Flagellating yourself in public while confessing your sins. The pain is self-inflicted, but the display is mandatory. Mortification displays took private penance and made it public. Religious communities required members to demonstrate their repentance through visible suffering. The more dramatic the display, the more sincere the repentance appeared. And if you didn't perform convincingly, you'd be required to do it again. The practice created a grotesque competition. Who could demonstrate more suffering? Who could debase themselves most thoroughly? The displays escalated because anything less than extreme seemed insincere. Moderate penance looked like pride. Only excessive self-punishment read as genuine. What made it psychologically damaging was the forced performance of self-destruction. You weren't just feeling remorse. You were performing it, amplifying it, making it visible enough to satisfy observers. The internal state became secondary to the external display. The pattern repeats in public apologies. Someone makes a mistake. The apology has to demonstrate sufficient suffering. Careers ended. Relationships destroyed. Visible consequences that prove the lesson was learned. Anything less seems insufficient. The person has to participate in their own destruction to satisfy the audience. Mortification displays worked because they forced people to destroy themselves publicly. The community didn't have to punish. They just had to watch while you did it to yourself. Mutilation Penalty. Lose a hand for theft. An ear for lying. Your tongue for blasphemy. The punishment doesn't end when the wound heals. It rewrites your body into permanent testimony of what you did. Mutilation penalties were designed to be visible and irreversible. The missing hand announced you were a thief. The slit nose marked adultery. The cropped ears showed you'd run from service or broken an oath. Every interaction for the rest of your life began with that mark. The cruelty was multi-layered. The initial pain, the permanent disability, the constant visual reminder to everyone you met. You couldn't hide it, couldn't explain it away. The body itself became the record of your crime. What made mutilation especially effective was its efficiency. One punishment created a lifetime of consequences. You didn't need ongoing surveillance or repeated penalties. The mark ensured you be treated as a criminal forever, by everyone automatically. Modern equivalents are less visceral but similarly permanent. A criminal record that blocks employment. A damaged credit score that prevents housing. A registry that forces disclosure. The mechanisms are different, but the logic is identical. One act creates a permanent mark that shapes every future interaction. Scold. Mutilation worked because it made rehabilitation impossible. The mark announced what you'd been, and society treated you accordingly. No matter how much time passed, the body kept the score. Confession parade. They march you through the streets. A sign hangs around your neck announcing your crime. Sometimes you're forced to shout it yourself, over and over, so everyone hears. I am a thief. I am a fraud. The rote is deliberate. Past your home, your workplace, places where people know you. Confession parades transformed guilt into performance. You didn't just admit wrongdoing privately. You proclaimed it publicly repeatedly, to ensure maximum visibility and maximum shame. The parade turned your neighborhood into your audience. The forced repetition served a purpose. Saying it once might be dismissed as coarse. Saying it dozens of times in your own voice, to different crowds, made it seem like acceptance. Like you'd internalized the guilt and then were voluntarily confessing. Even though nothing about it was voluntary. What made confession parades psychologically devastating was the participation requirement. You had to speak, had to walk, had to perform your own humiliation actively. Refusal meant harsher punishment. Compliance meant completing the degradation yourself. The pattern repeats in forced public apologies. Someone makes a mistake. The apology has to be public, detailed, repeated across platforms. One statement isn't enough. It has to be said multiple times, in different forums, until it seems genuine. Until the person appears to have accepted their wrongdoing completely. Confession parades work because they made you the instrument of your own shaming. The authorities set the rote. You walked it. They wrote the script. You performed it. And everyone watching saw you participating. Spectacle justice. Justice doesn't always happen behind closed doors. Sometimes it's broadcast. Cameras in courtrooms. Trials turned into television events. Sentencing that draws crowds. The proceedings become entertainment, and the entertainment becomes the point. Spectacle justice transforms legal processes into public performance. The goal stops being fair resolution and becomes dramatic satisfaction. Lawyers play to cameras. Judges make pronouncements designed for headlines. The defendant becomes a character in a story the public consumes. What makes spectacle justice dangerous is the pressure it creates. When trials are entertainment, acquittals feel like plot twists that disappoint. Lenient sentences seem like unsatisfying endings. The audience wants drama, closure, punishment. And that desire influences how the system operates. The defendant faces not just legal judgment but public judgment. And public judgment doesn't follow rules of evidence. It responds to narratives, to performances, to whether the story feels right. Facts become secondary to whether the outcome satisfies the audience. Modern media amplifies this. High-profile trials get analyzed like sporting events. Commentators predict verdicts. Audiences root for outcomes. The legal process becomes content, and the person at the center becomes a character people feel entitled to judge. Spectacle justice works because it satisfies multiple audiences simultaneously. It gives the public drama. It gives media content. It gives authorities visibility. And it gives the defendant nowhere to hide, because their life has been turned into a show everyone's watching. Ritual degradation. Strip the uniform. Remove the insignia. Break the sword. Each action performed in sequence in front of assembled witnesses. The ritual doesn't just end your position. It unmakes you publicly, step by methodical step. Ritual degradation was used for military officers, clergy, and nobility who'd violated their oaths. The ceremony reversed their elevation, removing symbols of rank, stripping titles, sometimes literally tearing emblems from clothing. Every gesture announced you are no longer what you were. The power came from formalization. This wasn't random humiliation. It was scripted, recognized, legitimate. Because it followed established procedure, it carried institutional weight. The degradation wasn't personal abuse. It was official judgment. What made ritual degradation especially crushing was the witnesses. Your peers attended. Your subordinates. Your community. They watched as everything that defined your status was systematically removed. The ritual didn't just change your rank. It changed how everyone who saw it would treat you afterward. The same structure appears in modern terminations. Security escorts you from the building. Your access is revoked immediately. Colleagues are informed via announcement. The ritual signals not just job loss but expulsion. And everyone who witnesses it understands they're watching an official casting out. Ritual degradation worked because it gave humiliation the weight of ceremony. The formality made it legitimate. The witnesses made it permanent. And the person being degraded had to stand there complying as their identity was dismantled piece by piece. Abjuration Ceremony. Stand before the congregation. Renounce your beliefs aloud. Declare them wrong, dangerous, heretical. List them one by one and reject them individually. Make it clear. Make it loud, make it convincing. Because if they don't believe you mean it, you'll burn. Abjuration ceremonies forced people to publicly abandon their beliefs. Heretics recanting before the church. Political prisoners denouncing their ideologies. The ceremony required specific words, specific gestures, specific demonstrations of renunciation. And it had to be witnessed. The cruelty wasn't just in the forced speech. It was in the impossible choice. Maintain your beliefs and face execution. Abandon them and live, but live knowing you betrayed everything you held true. And do it publicly so there's no taking it back. What made abjuration especially psychologically damaging was the performance standard. You couldn't just say the words. You had to appear sincere. Had to demonstrate that you truly rejected your former beliefs. Any hint of reluctance, any perceived insincerity, and the authorities could declare the abjuration invalid. Modern versions appear in forced recantations. Academics pressured to retract research. Public figures compelled to disavow past statements. The mechanism is similar: publicly abandon your position, prove you've changed, convince everyone you mean it. Otherwise, the consequences continue. Abjuration ceremonies work because they forced internal submission through external performance. You had to speak against yourself convincingly enough that both you and the audience believed you'd changed. The words became the prison. Tarring and feathering. Hot tar poured over skin. Feathers stuck into the coating. Then paraded through town, a grotesque figure that's barely recognizable as human. The pain is immediate. The humiliation is absolute. And the message is clear: the community did this. Tarring and feathering was mob justice, often used against tax collectors, loyalists, or others the community deemed enemies. It wasn't official punishment. It was collective violence dressed as popular justice. And because it was collective, no single person bore responsibility. The process was designed for maximum degradation. The tar burned. The feathers turned you into a spectacle. The parade ensured everyone saw. And the fact that a crowd participated meant no one could stop it. Individual objections meant nothing against collective action. What made tarring and feathering especially terrifying was its informality. There was no trial. No official sentence. Just community consensus that you deserved this. And once the crowd decided, there was no appeal, no defense, no escape. The same dynamic drives online mob actions. Someone is deemed deserving of punishment. The pile-on begins. Thousands participate, each individual action small, but the collective effect overwhelming. No single person caused the destruction, so no one feels fully responsible. But the target is destroyed just the same. Tarring and feathering worked because it distributed the violence across the crowd. Everyone participated. No one was solely responsible. And the victim, transformed into a warning, carried the message: this is what happens when the community turns against you. Public exposure penalty. Stripped naked in the town square, standing there while everyone looks. The cold, the vulnerability, the absolute loss of privacy and dignity. The punishment isn't physical pain. It's the complete exposure of what society says should stay hidden. Public exposure penalties forced people to stand or walk naked in public spaces. The offense varied: adultery, prostitution, moral crimes. But the punishment remained consistent: your body, exposed while the community judged. The mechanism worked through shame multiplication. Being naked in public violates fundamental social rules about modesty and privacy. Doing it involuntarily as punishment adds helplessness. And having it witnessed by neighbors and strangers creates lasting humiliation that extends far beyond the event itself. What made exposure especially degrading was the gender disparity. Women faced this punishment far more often than men. And for women, the exposure carried additional threats: assault, harassment, objectification. The punishment didn't just shame. It made them vulnerable to further harm. Modern equivalents trade physical exposure for privacy violation, revenge porn, leaked personal information, private moments made public without consent. The mechanics differ, but the damage is similar. Something private becomes public, and you lose control over who sees you at your most vulnerable. Public exposure worked because it violated the boundary between public and private. It forced visibility of what should remain hidden, and once exposed, you couldn't take it back. Sumptuary humiliation. Your clothing announces your rank. Peasants wear rough cloth. Merchants wear wool. Nobility wears silk. The rules are strict. Violate them, and you're punished not just legally but socially. Because your clothes aren't just fabric. They're a declaration of where you stand. Sumptuary laws controlled who could wear what. Colors, fabrics, styles, all regulated by class. Purple for royalty. Certain furs for nobility. Specific designs forbidden to commoners. Breaking these rules meant fines, confiscation, public humiliation. But the real punishment was social. Wear clothing above your station, and you're marked as presumptuous. Someone trying to be what they're not. The community enforces the violation through mockery and exclusion. The law might fine you. Your neighbors shamed you. What made sumptuary humiliation effective was its visibility. Clothing is constant. You can't hide it, so every interaction became a reminder of your transgression. And every glance from a neighbor reinforced that you'd stepped out of line. The pattern persists in dress code enforcement. Schools policing students' clothing. Workplaces mandating specific attire. The rules claim neutrality but often target specific groups. Girls' shoulders, natural hair, religious symbols. The enforcement becomes a form of control disguised as standards. Sumptuary humiliation worked because it made status visible and violations public. Your clothing became evidence. And everyone who saw you knew you'd broken the rules. Mock coronation. They crown you with a ridiculous hat. Give you a broken stick for a scepter. Parade you through town while people bow in exaggerated mockery. You're being made a king, but only to show how worthless you are. The ceremony inverts honor into humiliation. Mock coronations were used against people who'd claimed status they didn't have. Would-be leaders. Failed rebels. People who'd overstepped their place. The punishment transformed their ambition into spectacle, making them perform a parody of what they'd sought. The cruelty was in the detail. Every element of a real coronation appeared in distorted form. The crown was trash. The throne was a barrel. The ceremony was accurate enough to be recognizable, but degraded enough to be insulting. You were given what you wanted, but only as mockery. What made mock coronations psychologically devastating was forced participation. You had to play the role. Sit on the makeshift throne, wear the ridiculous crown, perform your own humiliation while the crowd laughed. Resistance meant additional punishment. Compliance meant completing the farce. modern versions appear in public takedowns. Someone with ambition gets exposed. Their aspirations become the joke. Their goals become the punchline. The internet crowns them ironically, turning their seriousness into spectacle. Mock coronations worked because they weaponized aspiration. They took what you wanted and gave it to you ruined. And they made you participate in mocking yourself. Infamia. What happens to someone the law declares infamous? They're still alive, still in society, but legally they're diminished. Can't testify in court, can't hold office, can't enter contracts. The law has marked them as less than full citizens, and that mark doesn't expire. Infamia was a legal status in Roman law, later adopted across Europe. Certain crimes or moral failings triggered it. Once declared infamous, you lost specific rights permanently. The punishment extended beyond the original sentence indefinitely. The damage compounded over time. You couldn't defend yourself legally because your testimony had no weight. Couldn't advance economically because contracts were blocked. Couldn't participate politically because office was forbidden. The law created a permanent underclass of people who'd served their sentences but never regained full status. What made infamy especially insidious was its legal legitimacy. This wasn't social prejudice. It was codified exclusion, written into law, enforced by courts. You couldn't argue your way out because the system itself defined you as lesser. The mechanism persists in modern legal categories: felony disenfranchisement, sex offender registries, professional licensing restrictions. The initial punishment ends, but legal consequences remain. The person re-enters society, but never fully. The law itself ensures they stay marked. Infamia worked because it used legal authority to create permanent exclusion. The state declared you infamous, and that declaration shaped every legal interaction for the rest of your life. Civic degradation. Lose the right to vote. Banned from jury service. Excluded from public gatherings. You're still a resident, but you're no longer a full member. The community has demoted you. Officially, legally, permanently. Civic degradation stripped away the rights that defined citizenship. Political participation. Legal standing. Social inclusion. The person remained in the community physically but was excluded from its civic life. They became observers, not participants. The punishment operated through exclusion. You couldn't vote, so you had no say in governance. Couldn't serve on juries, so you had no role in justice. Couldn't hold office, so you had no path to influence. Each exclusion reinforced your diminished status. What made civic degradation especially harmful was its invisibility. Unlike physical punishment, it left no marks. But it reshaped your relationship to society fundamentally. You lived in the community but couldn't participate in its core functions. You existed in civic silence. Modern versions target the same mechanisms. Felony disenfranchisement removes voting rights. Immigration status limits civic participation. Even economic barriers create de facto exclusion. The law or circumstances create categories of people present but not fully counted. Civic degradation worked because it redefined citizenship as conditional. You could lose it without losing residency. And once degraded, you remained in a community that had legally declared you unworthy of full membership. Outlawry. The law declares you outside its protection. Anyone can harm you without penalty, take your property without crime, kill you without murder. You're still alive, but legally, you've ceased to exist. And everyone knows it. Outlawry was the ultimate legal punishment. The person was declared outside the law's reach. They had no legal protections, no recourse, no rights. The community could do anything to them, and the law wouldn't intervene. The mechanism worked through total abandonment. Normal society operated under legal rules. Outlaws existed in the spaces between. They couldn't claim protection, couldn't seek justice, couldn't own property legally. They were functionally invisible to the legal system except as targets. What made Outlawry terrifying was its completeness. Other punishments took specific things. Outlawry took everything. Legal identity, protection, rights, functia. The person became legally a non-person, present but unprotected, visible but vulnerable. The logic appears in modern statelessness. People without citizenship exist in legal limbo. No country claims them. No law protects them. They're physically present but legally absent. And that absence makes them vulnerable to abuses the law would normally prevent. Outlawry worked because it removed the person from the social contract entirely. The law stopped applying to them, not just in punishment but in protection. They existed in society but outside its rules, and that position left them completely exposed. Ritualized mockery. Laughter on schedule. Insults in formation. The crowd knows when to jeer, what to chant, how long to point. Mockery stops being spontaneous and becomes ceremony. A script everyone follows. A performance where humiliation is the expected outcome. Ritualized mockery transforms spontaneous ridicule into formal practice. Communities develop specific ways to mock specific transgressions. The words, the gestures, the timing, all standardized. The mockery becomes predictable, repeatable, legitimate because it follows tradition. What makes ritualized mockery especially effective is its cultural legitimacy. This isn't bullying. It's how things are done. The ritual provides cover. You're not being cruel. You're participating in an established practice. Following the script absolves individual responsibility. The predictability also amplifies the humiliation. The victim knows what's coming. They've seen it happen to others. The ritual strips away any hope that this time might be different. The mockery will follow the pattern. The crowd will play their role, and you'll endure it exactly as others have. Modern versions appear in online pile-ons. Someone violates community norms. The responses follow patterns. The same phrases. The same jokes. The same performative outrage. The ritual has been digitized, but the structure remains formalized mockery that everyone knows how to perform. Ritualized mockery works because it transforms cruelty into tradition. The insults aren't personal attacks. They're cultural performance. And that performance makes the humiliation both predictable and unavoidable. Shame procession. Walk the designated route. Pass specific landmarks. At a specific pace. Your head must be lowered. Your posture must show submission. The route matters. The witnesses matter. Everything is choreographed to maximize visibility and shame. Shame processions forced people to walk predetermined paths through their communities while displaying marks of disgrace. Signs announcing crimes, specific clothing, sometimes chains or other restraints. The path ensured maximum exposure to people who knew them. The route was never random. It passed homes, workplaces, gathering places. Every turn was calculated to ensure the right people saw. Neighbors, colleagues, family. The procession mapped shame onto the geography of daily life, transforming familiar spaces into sites of humiliation. What made shame processions psychologically brutal was the forced movement. Standing in one place allows some psychological distance. Moving requires active participation. Every step you take advances your own humiliation. You can't zone out, can't mentally escape. Your body is actively performing the punishment. The pattern persists in perp walks. Suspects paraded in handcuffs for cameras. The route from building to vehicle carefully staged for maximum visibility. The walk serves no practical purpose. It's pure spectacle. The movement itself becomes the message. Shame processions worked because they turned geography into narrative. The walk told a story everyone watching could follow. And the person walking had to carry that story through spaces they'd continue to inhabit long after the procession ended. Excommunication Theater. The doors close in your face. The bells toll. Your name is read aloud as someone no longer welcome. The ritual is public, formal, final. You're not just excluded. You're expelled with ceremony that ensures everyone witnesses your casting out. Excommunication Theater transformed spiritual exile into public performance. The Catholic Church perfected this. Specific rituals, symbolic gestures, public announcements. The excommunication wasn't just declared. It was staged to ensure maximum visibility and impact. The ceremony served multiple audiences. For the excommunicated, it was devastating. For the community, it was warning. For the church, it was demonstration of authority. Every element reinforced that this wasn't personal judgment. It was institutional condemnation. What made Excommunication Theater especially powerful was its finality. The ritual marked a complete break. Not temporary suspension, not probation. Permanent expulsion performed so publicly that everyone understood it couldn't be undone quietly. The spectacle created permanence. Modern versions appear in public firings and expulsions. Companies announce terminations publicly. Institutions revoke credentials with press releases. The exclusion could happen quietly. Instead, it's performed. The public nature transforms individual punishment into collective lesson. Excommunication Theater worked because it weaponized ceremony. The formal ritual gave the exclusion weight and legitimacy. And the public performance ensured everyone understood that the person had been officially, irreversibly cast out. Peculiar punishment. Some punishments are designed to be strange, deliberately odd, memorably bizarre. Not because strangeness serves justice, but because weirdness ensures the punishment becomes a story people tell. Peculiar punishments stood out through their unusualness. Forcing someone to wear a barrel, making them stand with a specific awkward posture for hours. Punishments that weren't necessarily painful but were distinctly humiliating because of their absurdity. The peculiarity served a purpose. Normal punishments blend together. Fines, time served, routine consequences. But make someone wear a donkey costume while sweeping the street. That becomes memorable. The strangeness ensures the punishment outlives the sentence. What made peculiar punishments effective was their shareability. People remembered them, talked about them. The punishment became a story that spread beyond the original witnesses. And every retelling reinforced the humiliation, keeping it alive long after the punishment ended. The pattern thrives online. Creative punishments that get photographed and shared. Humiliating apologies that go viral. The punishment itself might be temporary, but the viral moment makes it permanent. The peculiarity ensures maximum spread. Peculiar punishments worked because they prioritized memorability over severity. The goal wasn't to inflict maximum pain. It was to create maximum spread, and strangeness guaranteed people would remember and repeat the story. Penal Display. The punishment isn't hidden. It's exhibited, placed where everyone can see. The stocks in the town square. The executed body on the gibbet. The criminal in chains at the city gate. The display transforms punishment into constant reminder. Penal Display made punishment architectural. It became part of the landscape, a fixture people passed daily. The punishment wasn't a discrete event that ended. It was an ongoing presence that shaped the visual environment and sent continuous messages about power and consequences. The effectiveness came from persistence. A whipping lasts minutes. A displayed punishment lasts weeks or months. Every person who walks past absorbs the message. Every child who grows up seeing it internalizes the threat. The display works through repetition and normalcy. What made Penal Display especially insidious was how it normalized authority. The punishment becomes background. Part of how things are. People stop questioning why someone's locked in the stocks. They just accept it as part of the social order. The display naturalizes control. Modern versions use different mechanisms. Sex offender registries that make information permanently accessible. Ankle monitors visible to anyone nearby. The methods change, but the logic persists. Make punishment visible so it becomes part of the permanent record everyone can access. Penal Display worked because it made punishment ambient. It wasn't an event you attended. It was an environment you inhabited. And that constant presence shaped behavior more effectively than any single dramatic punishment could. Moral exemplarity. One person's punishment teaks everyone else. The severity isn't calibrated to the crime. It's calibrated to the lesson authorities want to send. The individual becomes an example. Their suffering becomes curriculum. Moral exemplarity transforms punishment into pedagogy. The goal isn't justice for the specific act. It's instruction for everyone watching. Authorities select cases, amplify consequences, and ensure maximum visibility. The punishment teaks by making one person's consequences extreme enough to shape everyone else's behavior. The selection process matters. Not everyone who commits the offense faces exemplary punishment. Authorities choose who becomes the example, often based on visibility, vulnerability, or symbolic value. The randomness is part of the mechanism. If you can't predict who'll be chosen, everyone has to assume it could be them. What makes moral exemplarity especially cruel is the disproportionality. The person punished bears consequences far beyond what their specific act deserves. They're not being punished for what they did. They're being punished for what authorities want others to stop doing. The individual becomes a tool. The pattern appears in zero-tolerance enforcement. One student expelled to send a message. One employee terminated publicly to establish precedent. The individual case becomes theater designed to influence everyone else's behavior through fear. Moral exemplarity worked because it weaponized inequality. The punishment is deliberately disproportionate, and that disproportion creates fear in everyone watching, because they understand the system doesn't need to be fair to be effective. Name and shame. Publish the list. Every name, every offense, make it searchable. Permanent. Anyone looking can find it. The publication transforms private judgment into public record, and that record never disappears. Name and shame tactics expose individuals publicly to force compliance or punish behavior. The names appear in newspapers, websites, public registries. The shame comes from visibility, from knowing that anyone, anytime, can look you up and see what you did. The mechanism works through permanence and accessibility. A private punishment affects only those directly involved. A public list affects everyone who might see it. Future employers, neighbors, dates. The punishment extends indefinitely because the record remains searchable. What makes name and shame especially effective is its scalability. One publication can shame hundreds or thousands simultaneously. The list does the work. Authorities don't need to monitor each person individually. The public record ensures ongoing consequences through social enforcement. Modern digital systems amplify this exponentially. Online registries, review sites, social media call-out posts. The name becomes permanently linked to the behavior. Search engines ensure anyone looking will find it. The shame is automated and perpetual. Name and shame works because it outsources punishment to the public. Authorities publish the list. Everyone else enforces the consequences. And the person named carries that burden indefinitely. Disgrace Marker. A symbol everyone recognizes. A specific color. A particular badge. Something visible that announces this person is disgraced. The marker doesn't explain. It doesn't need to. Everyone knows what it means. Disgrace markers were visual shortened for social status. Yellow stars. Scarlet letters. Specific clothing colors or styles. The marker transformed complex social judgments into simple visual signals that anyone could read instantly. The effectiveness came from universal recognition. You didn't need to know the person's story. The marker told you everything the community wanted you to know. Avoid them. Don't trust them. Remember, they've been judged and found wanting. What made disgrace markers especially insidious was how they simplified complex humans into single categories. The marker erased everything else about the person. Their history, their circumstances, their humanity. They became the thing the marker said they were. Nothing more. The pattern persists in modern identification systems. Uniform colors in prisons. Badges in institutions. Even digital markers like verified accounts or warning labels. The symbol communicates status instantly, bypassing nuance or context. Disgrace markers work because they made judgment portable and instant. Con. The person carried the marker. Everyone who saw it knew how to respond. And the marker ensured the disgrace remained visible constantly. Community denunciation. The town gathers. Your name is called. One by one, neighbors stand and list your offenses. They're encouraged to speak, to add details, to ensure everyone hears. The community collectively declares you unacceptable. Community denunciation transformed individual judgment into collective condemnation. The person wasn't just accused by authorities. They were rejected by everyone. Neighbors, colleagues, people they'd lived among for years. The denunciation made it unanimous. The ritual served multiple purposes. For the community, it was participation, a chance to declare their own virtue by condemning the offender. For the accused, it was devastating. Hearing people you know list your failures publicly destroys any sense of belonging. What made community denunciation especially cruel was the performance of betrayal. These weren't strangers. They were people who'd known you, shared space with you. Now they were standing publicly to condemn you. The denunciation severed every social tie simultaneously. Modern versions appear in public pylons and cancellations. Someone is designated unacceptable. The community responds. Former colleagues distance themselves publicly. Friends issue statements. Everyone participates in the denunciation to prove they're not associated with the disgrace. Community denunciation worked because it isolated completely. When everyone you know publicly rejects you, there's nowhere to hide. The collective nature makes resistance feel impossible. Ceremonial submission. Kneel. Bow. Your head. Repeat the words they give you. Perform humility. Demonstrate that you accept your place. The ceremony isn't negotiation. It's formalized surrender. And everyone watches to ensure you complete it properly. Ceremonial submission forced people to perform their own defeat publicly. Rituals of apology. Acts of deference. Physical postures that demonstrated acknowledgement of authority and acceptance of punishment. The ceremony transformed internal submission into external performance. The ritual worked through witness and repetition. You didn't just submit privately. You performed submission for an audience. And the performance had to meet standards. Too proud and you'd do it again. Too casual and the ceremony was invalid. You had to convince everyone watching that you meant it. What made ceremonial submission psychologically damaging was the forced authenticity requirement. You couldn't just go through the motions. Your body language, your tone, your demeanor. All had to project genuine submission. The ceremony demanded you convince yourself as you convinced others. The pattern shows up in public apologies and forced recantations. The person must appear genuinely remorseful. Must demonstrate they've internalized the lesson. Any hint of performance invalidity triggers demands to do it again, more convincingly. Ceremonial submission worked because it made people active participants in their own subordination. The authorities designed the ceremony, but you performed it, and that performance became the evidence of your defeat. Public atonement. Make it right, publicly, visibly, in a way everyone can see. The atonement isn't private reflection. It's performed repentance. Community service in visible locations. Public apologies in crowded spaces. Acts of contrition staged for maximum witness. Public atonement transformed private guilt into public performance. The person had to demonstrate they were making amends. And that demonstration had to be visible, verifiable, public. Private change didn't count. The community needed to see the atonement to accept it. The mechanism worked through visibility and judgment. The atoning person performed tasks the community deemed appropriate. Cleaning streets. Public confessions. Visible acts of service. And the community watched, judging whether the performance was sufficient. What made public atonement especially demanding was the moving target. There was no clear endpoint. The community could always decide the atonement was insufficient. Demand more. Extend the performance. The person kept performing until observers declared it enough. Modern versions appear in public rehabilitation narratives. Someone makes a mistake. The path back requires visible, public demonstration of change. Not just private reform, but performative atonement that everyone can witness and judge. Public atonement worked because it gave the community power to define redemption. The person could atone endlessly, but acceptance depended on public judgment. And that judgment could be withheld indefinitely, keeping the performance going. Collective shame. In the end, all these rituals share something fundamental. They transform individual punishment into group participation. The authorities provide the framework. The community enforces it. And the person being shamed faces not just the system, but everyone around them. Collective shame operates on a simple principle. When everyone participates, no one feels fully responsible. The crowd throws stones. Each individual throw seems minor, but collectively they destroy. The distribution of action across many people dilutes individual guilt while amplifying total harm. This is why public shaming persists across centuries and cultures. It's efficient. Authorities don't need large enforcement systems. The community polices itself. Each person monitoring their neighbors, participating in collective judgment, enforcing social norms through shame. What makes collective shame especially powerful is its self-sustaining nature. Once established, the rituals reproduce themselves. People grow up witnessing public shamings. They internalize the mechanisms. And when their turn comes, they participate because that's how things are done. The digital age hasn't eliminated these patterns. It's amplified them. The rituals happen faster, reach further, last longer. But the core mechanism remains: isolate an individual, make the shame public, invite collective participation, ensure the consequences persist. Collective shame works because it transforms punishment into performance, judgment into entertainment, and cruelty into culture. And once that transformation is complete, the system runs itself.